Hey, welcome to The Explainer. We're all about breaking down big, important ideas. And today, we're jumping right into a really powerful book by the scholar and activist Angela Ye Davis. It's called Freedom is a Constant Struggle, and we're going to unpack its core arguments.
So that title, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, actually comes from an old freedom song, one that was sung a lot during the Civil Rights Movement. But, it's not just a poetic title. It's really the entire argument of the book packed into one phrase. The idea is that freedom, it's not some finish line you cross. It's a process, something that's always ongoing. And that simple idea, it really sets the stage for everything else we're going to get into.
Now, the book itself isn't a traditional narrative. It's actually a collection of interviews and speeches, and it's introduced by the well-known scholar Cornel West. But what makes it so, compelling is how it takes events that seem totally separate, like the protests in Ferguson, Missouri, and political struggles in Palestine, and weaves them together. It shows you this bigger, interconnected picture. It's all about learning to see the hidden patterns that link these different fights for justice.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with the idea of collective struggle, then zoom out to look at systemic issues and see how the book connects local events to a global framework. And finally, we'll look at its vision for the future. Let's get into it.
Okay, first up, this is probably the most fundamental argument in the whole book, and it's this. Davis makes the case that real, lasting change, it doesn't come from a few heroic individuals. Nope, it comes from the sustained, collective action of a lot of people.
Think about how we usually learn about history. The media loves to focus on singular figures, right? Like Martin Luther King Jr. or Nelson Mandela. But Davis argues that this view completely misses the point. It hides the thousands of ordinary people. I mean, think about the women who actually organized and drove the Montgomery bus boycott, who are the real engine of any movement. Her point is, when we start seeing history as the work of thousands, it suddenly becomes a lot less intimidating. You realize you don't have to be some kind of superhero to be a part of making a change.
All right, so taking that idea, the book then applies it to a much more recent event, the 2014 protests in Ferguson, Missouri, after Michael Brown was killed by police. And the key here is that it doesn't just look at this as a single, isolated tragedy. Instead, it uses that moment as a window, a way to look into a much, much larger system.
You've probably heard the bad apples argument, right? The idea that police violence is just the work of a few rogue officers. Well, Davis completely challenges that. The book argues that focusing on individuals totally misses the bigger picture. It says these incidents are actually symptoms of systemic racism. And the analogy it uses is powerful. What's the point of getting rid of one bad apple if the barrel itself, the whole system, is what's causing the rot in the first place? So the focus has to shift from just individual bias to the structure of the institution itself.
And this quote from the book, man, it really makes you stop and think. Why would a protest in a town in the American Midwest look like a war zone in another country? For Davis, the answer is just crystal clear evidence of a deep structural problem. I mean, the armored vehicles, the military-style gear, that stuff doesn't just show up by accident. It points to a direct pipeline of equipment, training, and even tactics flowing from global conflicts right into local American towns.
So all of this kind of state violence, it brings us to a really central concept in all of Angela Davis's work. She argues it's a key piece of a much bigger system, one she's been analyzing for decades, and it's called the prison-industrial complex.
Okay, so this is a really big and frankly challenging idea, so let's just break it down. When you hear prison-industrial complex, you might think it just means private companies running prisons for profit, but it's way, way broader than that. The book explains it as this powerful web of interests. We're talking private prison companies, yeah, but also the corporations that supply the food, the phone services, literally everything. All of these groups have a direct financial reason to want more people locked up. And that creates a system that's pushing for more imprisonment, whether or not crime rates are actually going up or down.
And just to get a sense of the sheer scale of this thing, look at this number. On any given day in the United States, there are about 2.5 million people behind bars. Now get this, that means the US, with less than 5% of the world's population, holds 25%, a quarter of the entire world's prisoners. That's just a staggering figure. And for Davis, a number like that is a huge red flag that this system is being driven by something other than just public safety.
And this leads to one of the book's biggest claims about what prisons actually do. It argues they aren't really a solution to crime. Instead, they've become a tool to manage these really deep-seated social problems. Think about it. Instead of spending money on things like education, mental health care, good housing, and jobs, the argument is that we've chosen to just
warehouse the people most affected by those problems. The prison becomes a convenient way to make all these complex social issues just disappear from sight.
So if you follow this line of thinking, you end up at a pretty radical question, one the book isn't afraid to ask. Should we just be trying to make prisons better, or should we be working to get rid of them completely? I know. The idea of prison abolition can sound like a total fantasy, right? Like something out of a sci-fi novel.
But Davis makes the case that it's actually a realistic goal. Because in her view, abolition isn't just about tearing down buildings. That's not the point. It's about building up a different kind of society. One where everyone has access to things like healthcare and quality education, where there are strong social support systems. It's about creating a world where prisons just aren't seen as necessary anymore. Okay, this brings us to another really key idea in the book. It's the argument that all these systems of oppression we've been talking about, racism, economic exploitation, state violence, they don't operate in their own little bubbles. Davis argues that to really, truly understand them, you have to see how they're all connected, how they overlap. And this way of thinking, it has deep roots in a long tradition of Black feminist theory. So, the way Davis explains it, Black feminism really grew out of the experience of Black women who were constantly being told they had to choose. What's more important, fighting against racism or fighting against sexism? And their answer was, that's a ridiculous question. You can't separate them. This whole idea, this lens for seeing how different forms of oppression are tangled up together, which we often call intersectionality today, it insists that you have to analyze them and fight them together.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The book takes this way of thinking and applies it not just to people's identities, but to entire political movements. So for Davis, connecting what's happening in the US with what's happening in Palestine, that's not just some side note. It's absolutely central to the whole analysis. It's all about finding those patterns, those threads that link what look like totally separate struggles for justice.
And that leads us to what is probably one of the book's biggest and most significant arguments. It's that the links between struggles like the ones in Ferguson and Palestine, well, they aren't just symbolic or metaphorical. The book argues they are real, concrete, physical connections that cross national borders. So, when you see similar tactics or similar equipment in both places, Davis is saying that's no coincidence. The book actually lays out a detailed case for how these situations are actively linked. We're talking about specific government policies, military programs, and corporate contracts. So, let's break down exactly how it connects those dots.
Okay, the book breaks this down into three main areas. First, you've got the hardware. U.S. police departments get their hands on surplus military-grade equipment from global wars. Second, there's the training. American law enforcement agencies have actually gone through training programs with Israeli military and police forces, sharing tactics. And third, and this is a huge piece of the puzzle, there's the profit motive. You have these massive global security corporations that are making money in both places, selling technology for surveillance, for walls, and for prisons.
And to make this crystal clear, the book points to a specific company, G4S. This company is a perfect case study. We're talking about the world's third largest private corporation, and they are making a fortune from this global prison industrial complex. The book highlights how they're involved in Israeli prisons and checkpoints, and also running immigrant detention centers in the U.S., and even managing privatized youth facilities. It's a powerful example of how one single company can be a thread connecting all these different sites of conflict and imprisonment around the world. So, okay, after laying out this huge, incredibly complex, interconnected system, where does that leave us? What's the path forward? What's the book's ultimate takeaway from all this?
The book concludes by drawing on this famous quote from Nelson Mandela. And the idea here is that freedom is indivisible. You can't cut it up into pieces. The central message, really, is that these different struggles for justice, they just can't win if they're all fighting alone. The argument is that true liberation can only happen by building solidarity across all kinds of borders, not just national borders, but also the borders that sometimes separate different social movements.
So in the end, Freedom is a Constant Struggle isn't a book that gives you a simple to-do list or a bunch of easy answers. It's not a roadmap. What it really offers is a new way of seeing, a powerful framework for analysis. It's a challenge, really. A challenge to look past the daily headlines and the isolated events, and to start searching for those deeper connections. And so it leaves the reader, and really all of us, with one final, really important question. In the world we see around us today, what connections are we missing?